Bonsoir. Bonsoir, bonsoir. Hello everyone. So my name is Claire Le Tanner. Je m'appelle Claire Le Tanner et je suis bénévole pour le CSPC, du comité du programme. Ça me fait très plaisir de pouvoir aujourd'hui introduire un panel aussi de haut standing. J'ai quelques devoirs à faire avant. So I will, before going through this FRQ panel, I have some homework to do. Since yesterday, I think you saw this amazing magazine. Please enjoy it. We put a lot of love and heart inside, so please have a look on it. And after this discussion with FRQ panel, there is a reception for celebrating the francophonie. Donc le CSPC vous invite à venir célébrer la francophonie lors d'un cocktail qui se passera juste après le panel. Maintenant que mes homeworks sont faits, je vais pouvoir passer à la suite, le panel que nous avons qui est nommé The Future of National Science Funders, Opportunity and Challenges for North-South and South-South Researchers Collaboration, qui est organisé donc par le Fonds de recherche du Québec. Et maintenant, je laisse la parole à Monsieur Nasser Fakouri.
Cool. Merci. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. So everybody's sitting in the back as if it's calculus class and they don't want the professor to call on them. There's lots of room here, so let's just pretend that this is afternoon tea at my house. I'm not going to give you any samosas, but well, it depends on what kind of questions you ask. But lots of room here. Please come up. We're really looking forward to it, dear colleagues. Bonjour tout le monde. Good afternoon. Je m'appelle Nasser Farouki. Je suis directeur d'éducation et sciences pour le Centre de recherche pour le développement international. So on behalf of IDRC and the Fonds de recherche du Québec, welcome to this panel on research partnerships in a rapidly evolving global landscape with a focus on Africa and the critical role of science granting councils. So as part of Canada's foreign affairs and development efforts, IDRC champions research and innovation in and with developing regions to catalyze global change. We proudly serve as a science granting council, supporting researchers and institutions in the global south. We invest in high quality research, share knowledge for greater uptake, and build global alliances to advance a more sustainable and inclusive world. So in our interconnected world, climate change, public health crises, economic instability, and social inequalities demand solutions that are rooted in evidence-based research. And strong scientific institutions are vital for tackling these issues and translating discoveries into policies that drive economic growth, reduce poverty, and build resilience. The recent Nobel Prize in Economics underscored how strong institutions are critical to drive national prosperity, a principle that's equally true for scientific institutions. And in an era of misinformation, increasing authoritarianism, and declining trust in science, evidence-based decision-making is essential for building a sustainable and inclusive future. We know that science is pivotal for solving these challenges, and we also know that research, whether it's north-south or south-south or north-north, yields stronger outcomes. So today's panel will highlight organizations that are working to transform Africa's science, technology, and innovation landscape. These organizations like IDRC recognize that while Northern funders play an important role in mobilizing resources and engaging, true progress really requires decolonizing research, partnerships, and elevating Southern-led initiatives. Southern researchers and funders are often best positioned to address local challenges. However, Northern support for science, technology, and innovation in the South still often bypasses Southern science granting councils. And this undermines their leadership, their capacity, their agency, and in fact, the ability to address the problems effectively. So the Science Granting Council Initiative, or SGCI, and forgive me anyway if I use that acronym too much, SGCI, it's shifting this paradigm. Established in 2015, SGCI strengthens the capacity of 17 granting councils across Africa, empowering them to set priorities, manage funds, and foster collaborations to contribute to social and economic development on the continent. IDRC is a founding partner and funder of SGCI, standing alongside South Africa's National Research Foundation, the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK, and several African councils from the very beginning. And we are delighted that today Swedish SIDA, NORAD from Norway, the German Research Council, DFG, and 17 African councils now join us in supporting the initiative. SGCI has had significant outcomes, and in fact, I'm just coming back, and I apologize because I'm jet lagged, coming back from Botswana, where we had our annual forum of the SGCI. It's the 9th year of the initiative. We're seeing increasing joint research between councils across the continent. So we have Cote d'Ivoire, for example, collaborating with Uganda on research partnerships. We're seeing increased uptake for private sector partnerships and other councils adopting Botswana's intellectual property audits to lay the foundation for more commercialization. We're seeing more gender equality and inclusion systematically in the council. So for instance, the Tanzanian council mainstreamed GEI into its institution. Burkina Faso integrated it into proposal evaluations. And as we're going to hear, Senegal has privileged a fund for women-led research. And we're also seeing growth. So new councils were established in Cote d'Ivoire, in Sierra Leone, and Ethiopia. And in the meeting that I just went to, Togo and Angola came to the meeting and want to join the initiative. So really, really excited about that. And I do really want to acknowledge South Africa's Department of Science and Innovation and South Africa's National Research Foundation for the pivotal role that you played in establishing the SGCI. And also your efforts to really drive STI systems across the continent in a transformative way and engaging in many bilateral and multilateral partnerships. Similarly, MESRI, which is the ministry in Senegal, and I'll introduce Suke in a moment, it's one of the 17 granting councils that we're supporting. And we were going to have another colleague that was coming from Cote d'Ivoire, who unfortunately didn't get his visa, was unable to join us. But these are the councils that are really increasingly becoming strong, showing their leadership and participating in initiatives like the Global Research Council as well, and fostering both South-South and North-South partnerships. And at the onset of COVID-19, of course, much of the funding was being directed to Northern researchers. So in response, IDRC and South Africa's National Research Foundation partnered to fund African-led research through the Science Granting Council. So they would prioritize, they would launch the calls, and African researchers were part of the solution to COVID. And I was so pleased when we invited the Fund de Recherche de Québec to join the effort, and they answered the call alongside many other funders. So this research addressed critical gaps and contributed to Africa's pandemic response. But not just Africa's pandemic response, because the researchers that we were supporting in South Africa actually identified Omicron during the initiative. Not only were they able to respond to Omicron in South Africa more effectively, but they were providing information to allow Canada to respond to the epidemic as well. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion of how Northern and Southern national science funders can collaborate and advance a new paradigm of inclusivity and equity, and really by strengthening Southern leadership and fostering truly collaborative partnerships, we can tackle the most pressing global problems, which we know cross borders. So we have a really impressive panel that are going to be discussing these issues this afternoon, and I'm going to introduce them now. So starting to my far right, we have Professor Janice Bailey, who serves as a Vice President of Research and is the Scientific Director at the Fonds de Recherche du Québec. Previously, she was a faculty member at Laval University, where her research explored environmental factors affecting health and fertility across generations. She is a distinguished fellow of the Society for the Study of Reproduction and a fellow of the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences. Welcome, Professor Janice Bailey. Next, we have Professor Suki Diaten. Suki is the Director of Financing for Scientific Research and Technological Development at Senegal's Ministry of Higher Education, Research, and Innovation. She's also a Professor of Oral Surgery and Head of the Odontostomatology Department at Idrissa Pouye Hospital in Dakar. She's a founding president of both the Association des Femmes Chirurgiennes Dentistes du Sénégal and the Association Sénégalaise de Chirurgie Orale. Her honors include Chevalier and Officier de l'Ordre National du Lion. I have no idea how you're directing this program and also doing oral surgery and head of the department, but all of the panelists are so impressive. And so last but certainly not least, we have Dan Dutoit, who is the Acting Director General.
Normally Deputy Director General.
You are the Deputy Director General. So Dan, you're the Deputy Director General for South Africa's Department for Science and Innovation. And since 2002, Dan has been with the Department of Science, Technology, and Innovation, including serving as its representative in Europe. He was appointed Deputy Director General for International Cooperation and Resources in 2014 and has advanced South Africa's science diplomacy through diverse global partnerships. I know that because every time I'm at an international meeting on science, Dan is there. In 2021, he was elected the Vice Chair of the Square Kilometer Array Observatory Council. So welcome to all of our panelists. So let's get started. So the first question is really just an introductory one. So I'd like you all to introduce your organization and highlight some of its research collaborations and maybe talk a little bit about why research collaborations are important to you. So Janice, I'm going to start with you.
Sure, thank you very much. Delighted to be here. Thanks everyone for coming out at the end of the day. So the Fonds de Recherche du Québec, or FRQ, is a government research funding agency in the province of Quebec. We fund academic research, so to universities and to colleges in the province of Quebec. And we have three major pillars or sectors. So I'm the head and the vice president of the STEM, Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math pillar or sector. And then there's also one on human health sciences, and my colleague Carole Jabé is head of that. Some of you might know her. And the head of social sciences, humanities, arts, and culture is Louise Poisson. So we all work together. We're quite independent. The President, Director General of the Fonds de Recherche de Québec is the Chief Scientist of Quebec, Rémi Carillon. And as I say, we're quite autonomous, so but we always collaborate on joint efforts. We are small enough to be very agile, so we can do what we want and maybe help a little bit faster than other agencies can, such as in the case during COVID, where we were able to participate quite quickly on that large joint effort. So, why would we want to conduct research in a north-south manner or international research? Well, first of all, a lot of us here are researchers. Why do you want to do research anyway? We want to make the world a better place. We want to do some public good. We want to investigate hard questions and find answers. But why would we want to work globally? Well, global problems need global partners, I believe. And so climate change is an issue. Sustainable food security, those are issues. And so working with people across the world is really a good way to come together and bring different lenses towards finding new solutions. I could talk about a lot of examples in terms of our global efforts, in terms of food security, energy transition, understanding what's happening with climate change, protecting biodiversity. Another thing is that, and this is something I learned a lot from the chief scientist, is that international research is a means of diplomacy. Scientific diplomacy is very important. We all know that in light of the increasing geopolitical tensions that we are faced with today, that anything we can do to help build bridges is effective. So that's one reason. Another thing is that Quebec is, I'm speaking to you in English. I'm an Anglophone person, but I've lived in Quebec for 30 years and I spend my life in French. But the cultural, it's good. The FRQ has particularly favored or encouraged, nurtured, maybe is a better word, nurtured links with Francophone nations, and to promote French language, to promote dissemination of science in French, which is really important. Doesn't matter what language we speak. It's important that the rest of the world can have access to our scientific outputs. And although the large majority of scientific publications are in English, we all know that there's a different vocabulary for insect species in Indigenous languages. And Indigenous knowledge will be best expressed in Indigenous languages. And the same goes for French or Portuguese or Spanish or African languages. It's really important, I think, to share that cultural and language affinity. And so that's one thing that FRQ has been very proactive in. Another reason that I think that we enjoy conducting research internationally and with Southern partners as well is, as I mentioned, FRQ is small enough that we can be quite agile, and we enjoy also being influencers. So sometimes we can do things in a better way, or what we think is a better way, and it's easier to co-construct research programs with our partners than it might be if we were a great big huge organization. And no offense to the great big huge organizations, but that's I think that we have that agility that lets us, like I say, co-direct and think about smaller issues that really make or break the success of a program. I think another reason why we often, just to finish, another reason why we often conduct internationalist research is really political. We work with the Quebec government, and the Ministry of International Relations and the Francophonie have priority nations. And so we will be encouraged perhaps to reach out and build relationships with these nations. And a really good example of how we do this is actually through a wonderful program that we have, which is called the Scientifique en Résidence. And so Quebec has about, I think it's 35 or 36 delegations in different countries. And so what we've done is we've funded this program for these Scientifiques en Résidence, which are essentially postdoctoral fellows that are interested in scientific diplomacy and science policy. And they go and conduct and spend a year or two in these Quebec delegations in different countries. So for instance, we have offices in Munich, London, Paris, UNESCO, but we also have a Scientifique en Résidence in Morocco and in Senegal. So these young people are wonderful ambassadors that really help to form links between Quebec and the institutions in that country in which they're posted.
Thanks so much, Janice. And when I heard you talk about where the scientifiques en résidence are located, can I be one? Can I apply?
I think that all the time. I think, oof, my life would have been different if I had had that opportunity. Oh, I'm very happy now, though. But
and really important point. I mean, about la francophonie, and when we worked with Fonds de Recherche du Québec. The ability to reach some of the West African councils, for instance, in their language in a way that makes it easier for the researchers to feel comfortable, so important. And I think one of no, this isn't political, but one of Canada's sort of value added is our ability to work in across the world, but certainly both in English and in French. Speaking of French, and our colleagues that are in part of the world where French is the predominant language, it's okay, I wanted to ask you the same question. Alors, pouvez-vous présenter, merci, en matière en évidence et ces collaborations? Et pourquoi les partenariats de recherche sont-ils importants pour vous?
Merci beaucoup, Nasser. J'ai l'honneur de participer à cette session de haut niveau pour discuter sur les partenariats entre le Nord et le Sud concernant la recherche. Pour me présenter, je dirais que je suis un enseignant-chercheur à l'Université Cheikh Anta Diop de Dakar. Je m'appelle Soukey Diatine, je suis professeur titulaire en chirurgie buccale et implantologie. Et au sein du ministère où je suis affectée depuis 2014, je dirige le financement de la recherche scientifique et du développement technologique sous la direction sous la tutelle, j'allais dire, de la Direction générale de la recherche et de l'innovation qui compte 4 directions, dont la mienne. Donc, nous avons une direction chargée des stratégies et de la planification de la recherche, dirigée par un professeur mathématicien, un collègue. La direction de l'innovation, de la valorisation de la propriété intellectuelle et du transfert de technologie, dirigée également par un professeur de technologie à l'université de Thiès. Et à la direction de la promotion de la culture scientifique, dirigée par une collègue qui est professeure de physique à l'université Cheikh Anta Diop. Et la mienne, la direction du financement de la recherche scientifique et du développement technologique. Et chaque direction est subdivisée donc en divisions et services. Dans le cadre de cette division, nous menons des activités principalement de financement de la recherche. Pour ça, nous avons des outils de financement. Principalement pour le financement public, nous sommes dotés d'un fonds qui existe depuis 2002 et qui est le fonds d'impulsion de la recherche scientifique et technologique dénommé FIRST, qui permet de financer des projets de recherche, donc issus des universités et des institutions de recherche de tout le Sénégal. Donc, il n'y a pas de discrimination, ce n'est pas réservé uniquement aux universités. Et ce fonds, donc, pour ce fonds, il y a chaque année un appel à projets et les projets sont sélectionnés selon leur l'excellence. En tout cas, les meilleurs projets sont sélectionnés pour bénéficier du fonds alloué chaque année pour ces projets de recherche. Et à côté de ce fonds qui est destiné à tous les chercheurs, pour prendre en compte la promotion des femmes dans le milieu de la recherche, nous avons un fonds dénommé PAPES, c'est un fonds pour améliorer la promotion des femmes enseignants-chercheurs. Et il n'y a que les femmes chercheurs qui peuvent postuler et ça permet de faire avancer un peu les carrières. Donc ça, ce sont les 2 grands outils que nous avons. Il y a maintenant des systèmes de promotion des chercheurs seniors avec le Grand Prix du chef de l'État qui est doté d'une certaine enveloppe chaque année, qui est lancé et qui permet de financer des chercheurs de haut niveau. Et nous avons, au niveau international, donc ces fonds que j'ai citées n'étant pas suffisantes pour vraiment venir à bout des demandes que nous recevons. Donc, nous faisons appel à des fonds additionnels par le partenariat. Et par le partenariat, nous avons le partenariat Nord-Sud dans le cadre des relations entre l'Union européenne et l'Union africaine. Donc, il y a un programme dénommé LibAgri. Donc, c'est le long partenariat entre l'Europe et l'Afrique dans le domaine de l'agriculture. Vous voyez que c'était ciblé, c'est l'agriculture. Je reviendrai sur ça. Et là, nous avons postulé, ça a permis. Donc là, chaque pays s'engage à cotiser à une certaine hauteur. Et en retour, il y a un top-up, le top-up de l'Union européenne, qui va revenir au pays en fonction du montant, en tout cas de la valeur de cotisation. Donc ça aussi, ça a permis quand même de lever des fonds assez importants dans le cadre de ces partenariats-là. Et je peux en citer d'autres, dans le cadre du partenariat Sud-Sud, où nous avons la Science Granting Council Initiative qui a été évoquée et qui nous donne beaucoup de satisfaction parce que ça regroupe 17 pays africains. Donc, et pour l'Afrique de l'Ouest, nous étions que 3 pays au début, 3 pays francophones. Vous voyez, tout le reste, c'était 15 autres. Les 12 autres étaient des pays francophones, anglophones, entre l'Afrique de l'Est et l'Afrique du Sud. Et nous autres, Afrique de l'Ouest, on était la Côte d'Ivoire, le Burkina Faso. Et récemment, la Sierra Leone nous a rejoints, de même que le Nigeria. Donc, vous voyez que là, il y a un brassage entre anglophones et francophones, mais ça en arrive en lien la barrière linguistique. Ça aussi, ça fait partie des défis auxquels nous sommes confrontés. Mais pour revenir à ce partenariat Sud-Sud, ça nous a permis vraiment aussi d'acquérir des fonds, et parce qu'il y a beaucoup de bailleurs dans ce partenariat, cette initiative. Et le principal bailleur, c'est le CRDI. Le CRDI, il y a... Nasser les a évoqués tout à l'heure, tous les bailleurs, mais c'est dans le CRDI nous a beaucoup appuyé et ça nous a permis d'avoir des projets collaboratifs en commun, principalement avec le Burkina Faso. Pourquoi le Burkina, vous comprenez, c'est la barrière, on parle la même langue, c'était plus facile. On partage beaucoup aussi avec la Côte d'Ivoire. Mais ce partenariat nous a permis vraiment d'avoir des fonds additionnels. Et même ce qui est intéressant dans ce partenariat, c'est pas que uniquement le financement, c'est aussi d'autres objectifs qui étaient fixés depuis lors de la création de la SJCI, c'est-à-dire le renforcement de capacités. Donc, ça a permis de renforcer les capacités des SJCI que nous sommes, donc c'est les conseils de financement, dans le cadre du montage des appels à projets. Donc, nous avons par ce biais amélioré nos documents d'appel à projet en ayant une fiche de notation qui permet aux évaluateurs d'harmoniser, en tout cas que les notes soient plus harmonisées et que la notification soit, la sélection soit la plus éthique et transparente possible. Donc ça, c'est grâce à EJCI, je peux le dire. Et aussi le système même ça nous a accompagné dans le système de gouvernance, dans l'amélioration du système de gouvernance, parce que c'est important. Nous, en Afrique, c'est ça, c'est une insuffisance auquel nous sommes confrontés. C'est vrai qu'il y a beaucoup d'investissements, beaucoup de moyens, mais il y a un gros problème de gouvernance. Et pour ça, JCI essaie d'harmoniser, en tout cas que les pays travaillent ensemble et qu'on s'inspire de ceux qui ont un bon système, tel que l'Afrique du Sud ou l'Ouganda, qui est cité souvent en exemple, pour élaborer des documents de politique, tels que le document de politique STI, que nous avons élaboré en 2023, le plan national stratégique pour la recherche et de l'innovation 2023-2032, qui est également en cours en tout cas d'exécution. Et tout ça, donc tous les 17 pays sont dans cette lancée pour essayer d'avoir des documents, en tout cas des éléments pour manager la recherche de façon plus équitable et plus efficiente. Donc, je ne sais pas si je suis déjà trop long, mais voilà, ce sont ces quelques éléments que je pouvais dire dans le cadre du partenariat, sachant qu'il y en a d'autres peut-être dans la discussion, je pourrais revenir là-dessus.
Merci beaucoup,
Je vous remercie.
Souké. Je crois que le fait on peut faire maintenant les collaborations entre les pays comme Burkina Faso et Sénégal, c'est très, très important. It's great that we're able to foster these collaborations across countries that are neighboring and so often face very similar problems, but weren't able to work on joint research together. So we're quite happy about that. So I'm going to turn it now to you, Dan, to talk a little bit about Department of Science and Innovation and your interest in collaboration on research and why you do it.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm from the South African Department of Science, Technology and Innovation, and for our Canadian friends, we are the equivalent or the counterparts of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, ESAT in Canada. It's with them we work very closely. So we are both a science funder because we fund science directly, but we're also a funder of a science funder because South Africa's main national science funder, National Research Foundation, they receive their budget from us. And that's an interesting topic actually for discussion, the relationship between government and science funders, notably with regard to independence. But before I start, it would certainly be a miss for me not to say that if I today have the privilege to sit on this panel as a proud public servant of a democratic South Africa and to reflect on the success of our science system, not to acknowledge that is in no small part due actually to assistance and a contribution from Canada. So for the younger generation in the room, because time marches on, but there was a time when South Africa was rightfully isolated from the rest of the world because of the oppressive policies of the apartheid regime. That fortunately changed. 1994, we became a democracy. And one of the things we had to do was to actually figure out what role must science play in this new democratic South Africa? How should science serve the needs of all South Africans? And the people we turned to and were assisted as was Canada, notably through the IDRC, who played a fundamental role in helping us to shape a science policy for a democratic South Africa. And it's for that reason that ICIT and ourselves have just funded a study on 30 years of South Africa-Canada collaboration, specifically reflecting on that collaboration. Someone many of you will know in this room, Paul Defour of IDRC, at the time played a leading role in that. He is actually the author of the study. But then to come to your point, we like to, one of the mottos, the slogans we live by in South Africa, well, at least in science policy, is to say that science knows no borders. Because we passionately believe about international cooperation. We have a diverse portfolio of different international cooperation partnerships. We're probably one of the few countries in the world who has a strategic partnership with the European Union, very active in Horizon Europe, and we look very forward to now work with Canada as a fully associated member to Horizon Europe. But at the same time, we also play a leading role in the BRICS framework program for science, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, now joined by a few others. A primary focus for us is investment in Pan-African collaboration, continental, regional, bilateral, public-private partnerships, increasingly collaboration with multinational companies, etc. So cooperation it's part of the DNA of our department in the science system. And why do we do it? Well, actually, for very much the same reasons which both my colleagues from Quebec and Senegal spoke about. First of all, because we believe that's how science progresses. Throughout history, it's been like that. We expand the frontiers of knowledge if we share experience, we share expertise, if we join resources. Look at, for example, large-scale research infrastructures. We cannot build them all in South Africa, so we have partnership with those who have the research infrastructures we don't have. We have limited funding for investment, so we have a bigger return on investment if we co-invest with others. So first of all, we collaborate because that's what's good for science, and that's what's good for South African science. But in secondly, and Professor Bailey spoke very eloquently about that, the challenges we face to which science must respond, and we all know them: climate change, pandemic disease, food security, biodiversity, poverty and inequality, that needs a global response. We need to work together. We're not going to solve it on our own. And I think COVID-19 showed that very decisively. And then thirdly, there's also very importantly, there's a science diplomacy element for us. One of the reasons, and it may sound a bit paradox for you, we invest in science diplomacy collaboration with other African countries, because part of our science system, our relations are dominated by North-South collaboration. South Africa is not as integrated it should be with the science system and the knowledge networks on our own continent. There are, for example, very few South African students who study elsewhere in Africa. And we cannot be an African country if we are not an integral and vibrant part of the African knowledge ecosystem. So we use science collaboration for that. But we also believe in the soft power of science diplomacy. A bit like Canada, one of the tenets, cornerstones of our foreign policy is a very strong commitment to multilateralism, to global solidarity. We are extremely worried as a government that those are values which are under threat. And we believe that science, which is a pursuit to bring people together, I mean, the scientific endeavor is a pursuit where we talk to each other, but more importantly, we actually listen to each other. And we seek to understand each other, and we are curious, and we do not seek to judge through prejudice. And we believe those are values which our world needs and which science diplomacy can play an important role. So that's who we are.
Thanks so much, Dan. And I think I would be remiss also if I didn't pick up on your first point. We were together at a reception with the South African High Commission here. We were talking about this history of Canada's support to the ANC and to Nelson Mandela after he became free. And actually, Canada started in 1988 working with the opposition in South Africa. I went back and I was reading up on the history myself, so it's sort of fresh in my mind. And in 1992, while Nelson Mandela was still in opposition, he made an official request to Canada to support. And so we developed a program with Global Affairs Canada that was essentially aimed at helping South Africa build the capacity to govern itself. And it worked in several areas, including industrial policy, in economic policy, and science. When President Mandela took power in 1994, half of his cabinet had been trained by IDRC. And it's really something I think as Canadians we can be proud of. I can tell you that when I go to South Africa, I get the benefits of this because we're kind of treated like rock stars in South Africa. But it's something that most Canadians don't know about, and it's a very, very important legacy. And I had just joined IDRC in 1995, and President Mandela came and addressed the Canadian Parliament and thanked Canada for the support, and it was just sort of wonderful and inspirational to join an organization that was doing, I think, important work, and we need to continue to work together, and we are. That point you made about soft power, I was going to pick up on it too, Dan. You know, one of the things that I've noticed, and it may, I wonder if it happens to you too, like so often when I'm speaking somewhere and we're talking about scientific collaboration, then often the Minister of Science or Research will come to me and say, we got our first grant from IDRC, and it might have been a $20,000 or $30,000 grant to do their master's or their PhD, but it actually was at a pivotal point in their career, and in some ways more important than $1 million grant that they got later on. And I'm saying this because we're here with a Canadian audience, and we're talking about, Canada and international collaboration and making the case for why we do science. It's to get better science done, certainly, when we collaborate, but it's also for science diplomacy, as both Janice said and Dan mentioned as well, that ultimately, when we work with colleagues from other countries, and then they so often take positions of political power later on after they become scientists, then the question is, who do we think that they're going to trade and innovate with for mutual prosperity. They do that with countries that reach out with them and treat them as equals in terms of the science. And that's where I'm going to pivot. This is the second question, because this panel really is not just about research collaboration, but it's about inclusive and equitable collaboration. So Janice, again, I'm going to start with you to reflect on what are the benefits of equitable, inclusive collaboration? Where do we see challenges in research partnerships from that intent?
Oh, that's a good question, and a lot of this I think has come from learning and mistakes, right? So if I can talk about a few stories from when I was a professor, okay. I was lucky enough to be at Laval University, and we had a very large program that was funded in collaboration with Global Affairs Canada, and it was with Mali. And the goal of this multi-year program, I'm not sure all the details, maybe it was an 8-year or 10-year program or something, and it was to train the next generation of professors at Laval University. And the goal was for them to always go back and to do exchanges and do part of their thesis research or master's research at home in Mali as well as in Canada, and to try and mobilize, and it was co-created with the Malian institutions. And that was really important, this concept of co-creation. And that's one thing I've also learned. It doesn't matter who you're working with, it's to develop things together rather than just swoop in and tell everybody what to do, because then you'll make a mistake for sure. But so what I learned with that particular program, something that was different than compared to other programs. Most programs, they give you just enough money to get started and to be excited, and then just to crash and burn. Okay, and I'm a funding agency right now, but that's unfortunately what happens far too often. This program that we did with the Canadian government and Quebec and with Mali was very different because it was quite generous. And a challenge is that I have seen, and I will try and say this delicately, is that sometimes it's hard to get professors in STEM where their laboratories are filled with lots of elegant and state-of-the-art equipment, and they usually pay their students a significant stipend, and they're really integrally connected with their students for 5 or plus years, okay? So it's a big relationship. A lot of times it's helpful when you know a student during their undergraduate, or they've come and done an internship in your laboratory. But when you bring in students from a country that you don't know, it can be very hard. It can be very difficult to convince professors to accept this student into your lab. Another thing is they might not have, the professors have their own programs. They don't know. So making that fit can be very difficult. But what this program did is that it really supported the students that came over, okay? So number one, it was very generous, much more generous than your average program. The students got generous funding. There were people in Quebec City helping the students pick their winter coats, buy their winter boots, help them to navigate, help them to find a place to live, understand how to take the bus, that kind of thing. So, and so that was, it gave them a bit of community. It also took a little bit of stress off the professors. The other thing is that this professor got a little bit of financing, him or herself, $10,000 or something like that. But that was enough to really provide a tiny bit of incentive, and not an incentive because $10,000 doesn't go very far, but I had one of those, a student in my lab from Mali, and that little $10,000 let me provide him with a research associate to make sure that he would, to help him train very quickly and make things easier. When we went to a conference, it was a no-brainer. He was coming with us because he had his own little bit of financing. And it was a really great way to, and I saw so many success stories with that kind of strategy. Where some problems were is right at the very beginning. Again, kind of naive. We're have this big program, and the students came over in cohorts, right? And so the first cohort of students to come over to do master's or PhD students, master's or PhD, the average age was 50. So that is not what we expected, right? We didn't expect that we would have a bunch of 50-year-old men come in to do their graduate work and then go back and be the, train the future generation of Mali when they're starting out at 50. So we learned that that was a different thing. So there was this kind of, a power issue there, where it was the most senior men in the institutions that said that they want to come over to Canada and do that. So then for the next cohort, we said, we put a cap on the age and said, okay, under 35. And that was great. We got obviously something a little bit more aligned with what both countries wanted, right? The government of Mali wanted to have younger people come over and spend their careers as professors. But then I got the privilege of going to Mali myself, and I heard from all the women professors there, and they said, 35 years is just inappropriate for me. I can't go to Canada when I'm 35. I've got kids. And then even if I'm a little bit older, I've got to look after my parents, blah, blah, blah. So we learned there that there was actually a gender and age issue that we had to dissect and consider. And these are things that, had we known, maybe we should have talked about that earlier, but hopefully the next project's going, the next program will consider these. So we actually, to try and compensate, is we actually put an envelope aside. And I'm using the we like I did this. I didn't do this. This is what they all did, okay? But what happened is they put an envelope aside for women alone to come over to give them that chance. And so that was very interesting. And then I want to come back again to the importance of working in French and the importance of language. Because when I went to that university and I saw the library, I thought this is where we have so much privilege and so much to offer and give and a service to other parts of the world. Canada and Quebec have to play a role there. Their library was just empty. It was filled with the old theses of the professors that were in there. I looked at some of the textbooks, 1978, things like this. They had, even if they could access fully the huge repertoire of, McGill University level journals and like that, which they couldn't because the internet was very slow. Most of the individuals on the campus were not functional in English. So the importance of us sharing and our science in French is bigger than some people might think. But when you go there and you see people, and the first thing that I'm speaking in French that professors are asking me is, how can I learn English so I can read the science? That's a wake-up call. It's important for us to value publishing in French or in different languages, what have you. But so those are a couple of challenges that I thought of that, I can talk about. I do want to talk about another successful story that when I was, and this was nice to meet Dan today. One of my first postdoctoral fellows was actually from South Africa, and he is now the Dean of Health Sciences at University of Pretoria. So that makes me feel old. But that was a relationship that we were able to build on. And my very last really great science project or program that I had before I came to the FRQ was with South Africa and working on sustainable malaria or sustainable malaria control in sustainable manners, because and so that was a very interesting kind of way for us to mutualize our resources. We had some great resources and great knowledge here in Canada, but also in South Africa, they had amazing resources and tools that we couldn't even manage. And in fact, that really gave us the last paper that I was an author of, had Inuit from Greenland and Indigenous people from South Africa that were all affected by global contamination. And so we got to compare these samples. And so that was a really rich type of study that we could do, that we couldn't just do it if we were doing it in our labs in Quebec City. There you go.
Thanks so much, Janice. And I mean, it was such a sort of heartwarming story you told, but it's not just heartwarming in the sense of what you're talking about, that program where, you know, there was some extra money for professors to help students have an enabling environment so that they felt safe, they felt secure, they felt warm, they knew how to take the bus and all of that. And, you know, we all know when we go somewhere different that, you know, those are all the first sort of practical things that we need to pay attention to. And if that isn't taken care of, then we're not able to collaborate effectively, and the science won't follow without, you know, those preconditions. So thanks for sharing that. I think your point about differential impacts on men and women and other groups, and looking at policies not in a gender blind sort of way is super important. And Suke, I'm going to ask you to pick up on that. Est-ce que vous pouvez parler un peu des problèmes d'inclusivité et équité en matière de recherche, mais peut-être vous pouvez aussi parler un peu de programmes au Sénégal liés avec les femmes chercheurs.
Merci pour cette question. Donc, le constat est que le nombre de femmes est vraiment très faible au niveau des universités. Donc, au début, il y a quand même un nombre assez acceptable, mais le problème, c'est le maintien dans la carrière universitaire et même le maintien dans les études universitaires, donc l'enseignement supérieur. Parce qu'il y a eu des politiques au niveau du gouvernement pour qu'il y ait une promotion des filles à l'école. Parce qu'avant, bon, pratiquement, les filles n'y allaient pas. Mais maintenant, pratiquement, les statistiques montrent que les filles dépassent pratiquement les hommes au niveau des effectifs des écoles. Mais avec le temps, donc jusqu'à l'université, ça commence à s'équilibrer. Mais à la sortie, pratiquement, on ne voit plus les femmes. Et ça se traduit dans les effectifs des enseignants-chercheurs. Nous représentons que 15% des effectifs malgré les efforts. Donc, c'est pourquoi il faut des mesures spécifiques, voilà, donc, pour que les femmes puissent avoir une carrière au niveau de l'université, d'où le fonds dont j'avais parlé. Mais ce n'est pas suffisant. Il faut aussi des mesures incitatives pour permettre aux femmes d'élever leurs enfants, d'être dans des foyers et poursuivre. Et pour ça, il y a des initiatives, par exemple, l'université qui est au nord, l'université Gaston Berger, a initié donc la création de crèches carrément à l'université, parce que les doctorantes étaient venues voir le recteur pour cette doléance. Et là, voilà, il y a cette infrastructure qui a permis à des filles qui certainement des femmes allaient arrêter leur carrière ou les études. Ça leur a permis de finaliser en tout cas leurs études. Et après, même les enseignants-chercheurs ont eu cette opportunité de mettre leurs enfants dans ça. Et là, nous sommes en train de réfléchir au niveau du ministère comment vraiment en faire un programme. Et voilà, donc dans le cadre du EJCI, il y a une manifestation d'intérêt dans le cadre d'un programme qui s'occupe du genre, de postuler pour pouvoir essayer de voir comment nous accompagner pour qu'on puisse concrétiser ce programme, qu'on puisse le mettre à l'échelle. Donc ça, c'est un cas. L'inclusivité est une réalité. Donc le problème de l'inclusivité, ça veut dire qu'il y a des initiatives, mais c'est encore insuffisant pour permettre une meilleure insertion des femmes dans la carrière universitaire pour qu'elles puissent développer leur carrière. Voilà, l'autre souci, c'est l'équité, l'éthique et l'équité. Donc là, c'est dans les collaborations de recherche. Il faut veiller à ce que ça soit équitable. Sinon, le constat, c'est que c'est le bailleur qui impose même les domaines de recherche. J'ai donné le cas du LibAgri. C'est vrai que c'est un programme qui a permis de financer, donc dans le cadre de l'Union européenne, c'était le programme H2020 de l'Union européenne, mais c'était un domaine bien précis, l'agriculture. Donc, toute la recherche en tout cas, les chercheurs devaient pousser. Donc, les autres domaines. Par contre, dans le EJCI, il n'y a pas cette contrainte, d'où l'intérêt vraiment de ce programme, parce que tous les pays ont la latitude de choisir leur domaine de recherche. Même si c'est en collaboration, par exemple, nous, quand on collaborait avec le Burkina Faso, nous avons discuté entre les deux conseils, chacun ses préoccupations. Nous, on avait des préoccupations dans le domaine de l'agriculture sur les terres salées, avec l'avancement de la mer, et aussi le problème des maladies chroniques chez les personnes âgées. Et les Burkinabés aussi avaient et là, on a matché les deux, et ce qui a permis de signer une convention de partenariat dès le départ. Tout était clair, on savait où on allait, et aussi on a pu faire un appel à projet commun. On a pu faire aussi une évaluation commune en matchant toujours les évaluateurs du Burkina, donc des enseignants, des experts du Burkina et des experts du Sénégal qui ont pu évaluer les projets et sélectionner les meilleurs. Et dans ce cadre-là, il y avait 4 projets, 2 du Sénégal, 2 du Burkina dans le domaine, ce qui fait que vraiment c'était un exemple quand même réussi et qui prouvait que c'était équitable parce que nous avons choisi notre domaine de recherche par rapport à d'autres bailleurs qui ne le font pas. Et là, donc, le Sénégal aussi, on a eu une expérience dans le cadre de la recherche équitable qu'on appelait la recherche fairness initiative qui était initiée en 2018 avec le CORED. Donc, c'est un collectif qui fait la recherche dans le domaine de la santé. Mais ça pouvait être quand même appliqué dans d'autres domaines. Et on avait un projet pilote qui avait ciblé 3 institutions de recherche, une université où il y avait donc un domaine médical, l'université Alioune Diop de Bambey qui est à presque 150 km de Dakar. Il y a un institut de recherche en santé dirigé par le professeur Souleymane Mboup qui est un grand chercheur qui avait un co-découvreur du HIV, VIH-Sida. Et il y avait le centre d'excellence mère-enfant, parce que nous avons des centres d'excellence financés, donc toujours dans le cadre de ces partenariats, entre l'AFD, donc l'expertise France maintenant, et la Banque mondiale, qui finance 5 grands projets de recherche, les centres d'excellence mère-enfant dans le domaine de la santé. Et il y en a dans le domaine mythique, donc les TIC. Et il y en a dans l'agriculture, le transport, etc. Donc, pour dire que vraiment, cet outil qui était le RFI, c'est un guide qui permet en tout cas de cibler, de diriger des indicateurs dans tous les 3 stades de déroulement de la recherche. C'est-à-dire, avant la recherche, on essaie de voir si en tout cas, l'éthique est vraiment prise en compte en partant des utilisateurs de cette recherche. Même la communauté est impliquée. Donc, c'est un document vraiment avec des indicateurs, 15 indicateurs, 3 domaines, avant, au cours de la recherche et après. Et au finish, là aussi, il faut que les 15 indicateurs puissent répondre à la question, est-ce que les résultats de cette recherche-là seront équitablement partagés, etc. Parce que le constat est que aussi la recherche est externalisée. Nous avons, tous nous faisons nos recherches en Europe parce qu'il faut sortir. Moi-même, j'ai fait ma formation post-universitaire à Marseille. Parce qu'on n'a pas des infrastructures de haut niveau. Donc là aussi, c'est un défi que nous devons relever pour que la recherche en Afrique puisse aller de l'avant. Il faut des infrastructures de haut niveau et mutualisées parce que là aussi, la réalité, c'est que chaque pays ne peut pas avoir une grande plateforme de génétique moléculaire ou d'autres choses, de microscopie électronique. On peut mutualiser, surtout dans le cas du SJCI. essayer de voir comment mutualiser pour qu'on puisse disposer des outils qui nous permettent de faire de la recherche de pointe. De ce fait, à ce moment-là, nous allons maîtriser nos données. Parce que là, la recherche étant externalisée, les données nous échappent. Et là, voilà, et le constat, ça veut dire que voilà, les chercheurs africains sont en sous-nombre. On ne représente que 1% de tous les chercheurs du monde, vous voyez. Alors que c'est des chercheurs sénégalais, des Africains aussi, globalement, qui sont dans des laboratoires de recherche ici au Canada, partout, hein. Et là, c'est ce qui fait que même dans notre plan stratégique national, pour quand même essayer de trouver une solution à ça, c'est une réalité, on envisage de créer l'université de la diaspora, c'est-à-dire de la diaspora. Parce que vraiment, on a toutes les expertises partout. À Canada, McGill, ici, on a de grands. Et là, pour le faire, on a eu à faire des séminaires dans le cadre de ces plateformes de recherche où il y avait des universités sénégalais de McGill qui étaient venus de tous les pays aussi. Et parce que c'est une réalité, c'est des fils du pays, mais qu'on ne peut pas utiliser. Et dans ce cadre-là, ça permet quand même d'avoir de plus de ressources, aussi bien, surtout en expertise. Donc, je pense que c'est ça qui nous permettrait de rendre la recherche plus équitable et aussi pour l'inclusivité, aussi essayer de favoriser quand même la discrimination positive pour les femmes. On y plaide et je pense que c'est important parce que nous représentons quand même plus de la moitié de l'humanité. Vous voyez qu'au Sénégal, si on n'a que 15% qui soient impliqués au niveau de recherche, quand même, ça, c'est pas très vivable. Voilà, merci.
Merci beaucoup, Suke. J'aime beaucoup cette idée de université de diaspora. I was going to also pick up on your point about research led by women and maybe just share briefly lessons learned within IDRC. You know, we supported individual women to do, you know, for fellowships, for masters and doctoral studies and so forth. And that continues to be very, very important. But we found, and others have found this, that, you know, the women in Africa, for instance, would get their doctorates. Then they'd come back to their home university, and then they would be the ones that would be asked to go get coffee. They would be the ones that would have to write the research proposal, but that would not lead the research team. When the papers were being written, their name would be last on the authored paper. And you know, we really reflected that we needed to take more of a systems approach to this, because you can help individuals build their skills, but if the system around them is not changing, then so often what we found, and it happens in Canada too, is this sort of scissors effect, where there's actually more women in higher education at the start of their studies. But then over time, they leave the profession because of these, you know, 1,000 visible cuts or microaggressions and that sort of thing. So we really started working on approaches to helping build capacity to write research proposals, supporting funds to do set up labs, and funds that are specifically aimed at women to lead research programs, but then also think about the institutional policies in the universities or other research institutes in their working in, for instance, anti-sexual harassment policies. So again, that they feel comfortable. So, you know, that problem of inclusivity within the research enterprises is, I think, so important. Dan, it's your turn. I wanted to ask you about your experience when it comes to inclusivity and equity in research partnerships, and your thoughts about what goes well, what doesn't go well, and what we can do about it.
Okay. I will look at it, first of all, when we speak about inclusivity, I will in terms of co-ownership. And how do different partners really own the agenda so that we ensure that the benefits are equitable and truly share. And I would classify the type of partnerships in 3 categories. Now, for people of my age, you may remember there was a Western film called The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. So, je pense en français, c'était le bon, le méchant, le truand, peut-être. So The good are those which, and Madame spoke about that, which are really truly co-designed, right from the start. There's an open, there's a frank, there's a honest discussion, and the best ones are, be very honest, are the ones where we actually all are co-invested. And that's why a critical principle for South Africa's international partnership is that we co-invest, even if it's asymmetric, a smaller investment, but then you truly own the agenda. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of the SGCI as well, is to encourage the African partners to co-invest, because then it's a co-owned program. That is ideally a partnership where also civil society, if it has industrial applications, the business sector, everyone is co-invested from the start, shaping the agenda, co-owning the agenda. So that is the good example. The bad example is where the agenda is just unilaterally set by, and Madame spoke about it, typically the funder. Now, I don't want to sit on this platform just to complain, because it's very important as African governments, and I'm a representative from an African government, that we also take responsibility for our own lack of investment and funding of research. It's easy to say there is no money. We know there is. There is also funding for other things, so there should be money for science. One of the complaints we often have is that at the continental, the regional level, most of the programs are donor funded, and then we should first of all look at ourselves why that is so, and why are we not co-investing. But what we do know is that these agendas, which are unilaterally set, they completely distort or inhibit any country from developing its own national agenda. Because sadly then, if you are in a country and if you are in an environment, which is not the case, and I'm privileged to be from South Africa, where there's no national funding, you go where the funding is. So there's no speak of any national agenda and national institutional capacity. And that for us is a primary focus to avoid that. But then there's the third example, and because it's late in the afternoon, I thought I'll just be a bit provocative. And that is the ugly example. And that's where it's actually where the agenda is being set in a dishonest way. And that, unfortunately, we see a lot of as well. Where we spoke earlier about the soft power of science for good, bringing countries together. But there are also programs which have very clear goals to advance economic diplomacy, and in Africa's concern, specifically market access. So programs are disguised as research collaboration, where it's actually all just a marketing ploy for products coming from the north, having access to the African market. And that is starting, it's a conversation we don't often speak about because it's sensitive, but it is one which is increasingly certainly on our table for discussion, because that is harming international science collaboration. And we see this typically, for example, in the domain of renewable energy. We see it in the domain of the digital technologies. And often it's also, and don't get me wrong, I'm not sitting here to complain about brain drain or any of that. We believe in the positive power of brain circulation, but there are also some programs which are just scouting for our talent. And Madame spoke about that. Now, first of all, we should take responsibility. Why do people leave? Why don't we create the incentives and the system for them to leave? But if international cooperation programs have other objectives, and we're not honest and frank about that, I think it actually causes harm for this whole enterprise.
Thank you very much, Dan. And I really value your openness and transparency, because I think we have to talk about these challenges, honesty, what's going well and what isn't, and when things, as you say, are kind of couched and sort of hidden. I was just very briefly going to share a little bit of good news, I think, in terms of international collaborations. We commissioned a study on science, technology, and innovation, the state of that in Africa, which was done by our friends at Stellenbosch University in South Africa. And it was looking at funding flows and the challenge of African countries actually not knowing how much funding is happening in their countries, and even sometimes on what themes. in a way that can lead to lack of coherence and too much money going into one sector, perhaps, and not enough going into another sector. But there was also some good news in it, and it sort of surprised me. What the researchers revealed that the share of African science in terms of papers where there's at least one African author over the last 20 years has more than doubled. Albeit from a fairly low base in terms of the contribution to world science, but that's really good news. The other good news, and this really speaks to the point about equity, where we have a big room to move still, though, was that the papers where there were several authors and there was sort of a north-south collaboration, that they've now reached 40% where the African author is the primary author, whereas before sometimes they weren't even on the paper, and they were just, it was just sort of extractive. They were there for kind of data and that sort of thing. So lots of room to improve, but I did want to share that, and we will be publishing that study in about 6 months as we're just finalizing it. Speaking of finalizing, the time just passes so quickly when you're having fun and having a good discussion. We just have a few minutes left, and I did want to see if there was somebody from the audience, and there is at least one person in the audience who wants to make a question or a comment. Can you quickly identify yourself? There's some microphones there, and go ahead, Gordon.
Hello, thank you. I'm Gordon McBain. I'm a professor at Western University, but I used to be the president of the International Council for Science. I would like to say that I very much enjoyed this discussion. I wanted to start by saying that I agree with what Dan said, that science knows no borders and we need a global response. And I had the pleasure of discussing these kind of things with Dan earlier today, and actually we think about 7 or 8 years ago when he was hosting a big event in South Africa and I was there as president of the International Council for Science. But I just wanted to stress that there are so many things we can do, and one of the things that working together in these international programs is an area where I've been working. I had the pleasure when I was elected as president-elect initially of the International Council for Science, that I got to appoint as the CEO of our council, Dr. Heidi Hackman, who she made a great difference. And when I became president, we worked together to merge the International Council for Science with the International Social Science Council so that we could have this working together across disciplines and issues. And so I found from my own experience, and just from my other colleague on the table, I should say that I also chair the board of the Future Earth program in Montreal, which is funded by Rémi Crillon, the FRQ, if I got that one right. And my first ever trip to Africa was to Senegal, Dakar, in 1974, when I was only 2 years old. Actually, I was older than that, but I won't go into that. But we had an international research program of ships from coast across the Atlantic Ocean to investigate storms coming and affecting countries in the equatorial regions. And the Canadian ship, it went across the ocean, and I flew in from Toronto to Dakar and had a very good experience of visiting Dakar for several days before and after the ship went away again, after I'd been a month at sea. I had the even better privilege of working with people. But I just wanted to say that there are some international programs that through the International Council for Science, we're trying to activate things. And if Canada can play an even bigger role than it does play, but it could play a more formalized and working together role. And we can talk about that in more detail. But I'll end on a positive note that one of the best ever research programs I've had was supported by IDRC, working jointly with the funding councils. And I don't know whether this has happened since, but this was in 2010. We got a 5-year grant, which half the money was used to fund Canadian professors and researchers across the country to work with scientists in the other countries of the world. So we had a program looking at coastal cities at risk due to climate change, with studies in Bangkok, Manila, and Lagos. I had one of my then PhD students from Lagos, and she was an amazing student. let's say, the best ever PhD student I've had. And she did her PhD thesis studying issues in the flooding zone of Lagos, Nigeria. And I think having those kind of projects where we bring people together from across the countries, across the disciplines is so valuable. And learning from each other as we work together as a team can make a big difference for science, and finding ways of, let's say, continuing to accelerate this connectivity will make a big difference in terms of what we can collectively learn and help our local societies and global societies to be even more enhanced as we go ahead. I'm a climate change guy now, so I'm primarily focusing on the issues of climate change, but we know how the increasing number of extreme events and sea level rise and stuff will have huge impacts, unfortunately, on developing countries, more so per person, so to speak, than in others. But it's a global issue we need to work with together, and we can work with the global programs of science on climate change, on disaster risk reduction, and the Global Environmental Change START program that I used to be the chair of, which is capacity building in Africa and Asia by giving out grants and working. And well, it was one that created the team I had together to work together for that Coastal Cities at Risk project, was an initiative of the START program. So anyway, thank you for your discussion and your contributions. And as I say, I've only met with Dan to chat, but I'll chat with the other two. I will have the privilege of talking with you tomorrow, because I won't want to talk to you any further today. So thank you very much. A very interesting discussion, and very important as how we need to work together as a global community to make positive implications. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gordon. And actually, you're helping us end on a very optimistic note. And I have to tell you that when I first took my current position, one of the first programs that I was responsible for was the one that you described, where we were working with the granting councils and helping support research Canadian scientists and those across the world on coastal cities at risk. It's a great example of collaboration on issues that address everybody, and we get better solutions when we work together. We have 1 minute and 5 seconds left, so I was going to ask you all to make kind of a last, any last thing you want to say. I think that this audience is probably ready to hit the bar, I was going to say. Would you like to make a last statement? We don't want to keep the audience too long. So Janice?
I'll be actually at the reception next door, so come and speak to me there, and everyone is welcome. It is to celebrate Francophone science, but also Francophiles are invited to join us. But I'm going to let our guests here maybe say another word.
It's okay.
Pour remercier l'assistance d'être resté nous écouter et d'échanger avec nous. Donc, c'était un plaisir vraiment de partager notre expérience et pour revenir sur l'importance de la recherche pour le développement socio-économique de nos pays. Merci.
Merci, it's okay. Dan?
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and we're very happy to speak to anyone who's interested in working with South Africa.
Great, thanks. I was going to do a bit of a sum up, but I'm not going to, because I think Gordon actually summed it up very nicely in terms of the importance of international collaboration and our continued need to focus on inclusivity and equity, and who sets the priorities and so forth. So I just want to ask the audience to please help to join me in thanking our panelists, Janice Bailey, Suki Ditien, and Dan Dutoit. Thank you so much.